So the big moment is here, the second impeachment trial of a president. But before the main event, we were treated to a day of arguments over whether the trial should be held at all.
Judgment, in other words, the bad thing that can happen, the judgment, in cases of impeachment, i.e. what we are doing, shall not extend further than removal from office. President Trump no longer is in office. The object of the Constitution has been achieved. He was removed by the voters.
The text of the Constitution makes clear there is no January exception to the impeachment power. That presidents can't commit grave offenses in their final days and escape any congressional response. That's not how our Constitution works.
And with a majority of senators agreeing with that latter argument, the trial itself is expected to move quickly through the rest of the week, with each side getting up to 16 hours to make their case. A final vote could come as early as the start of next week. But this time around, the consequences are a little different because, as the defense said, Trump has been out of office for weeks now, and there's been some dispute over whether a vote to convict would actually bar Trump from ever holding public office again. An issue we raised yesterday on Boston Public Radio with constitutional scholar and Harvard Law Professor Emeritus Lawrence Tribe. Tribe told us a second vote would be needed for that, which could only happen if the Senate did convict. And conviction requires a two-thirds majority, as I'm sure you know, meaning at least 17 Republicans would have to join all 50 Democrats, which is a stretch, to say the least, based on what Republicans have been saying over the past several days. But even if the Senate does not end up legally blocking Trump from running again, my next guest argues in a new Washington Post op-ed they could discourage him from running again. Nancy Gibbs is the director of the Shorenstein Center on Media, Politics, and Public Policy at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, former writer and editor-in-chief at Time magazine. Nancy, it's good to see you again.
Nice to see you, too.
You know, speaking of Tribe, he also said yesterday to us on the radio that he believed that the case was going to be presented so powerfully by Jamie Raskin and his colleagues that Republicans would have, I don't know, a come-to-Jesus moment and vote for conviction and ultimately to bar. Obviously, you don't subscribe to that school of thought.
You know, it feels a little like wishful thinking. It is true that there has to be something particularly powerful about them being in that chamber, watching the video of the ransacking of this most sacred space. Like, this was their home being intruded on. This is not abstract to them. And the trauma that many of them experienced, their staffs, all of that's very real. And so, you know, we're dealing with emotional elements here that are more acute than certainly when we were talking about, you know, the Ukraine phone call.
Sure.
Having said that, this is a hard-nosed political calculation that many of them will be making. And I don't see a lot of evidence to imagine that they're going to vote against what they calculate to be their political self-interest.
So as I said a second ago, your piece was, if you can't bar him, at least discourage him. And you suggest that by converting norms, most of which he violated, if not all, to laws or something comparable to that, you may convince the Donald Trump we've grown to know quite well that running would not be a great idea. Is that a fair characterization of what you said?
Yes, and we start with the advantage that there was always a lot of evidence that he enjoyed running for president, campaigning for president, much more than acting as president. And so while the idea of campaigning again might always appeal to him, and he will love the crowds and love the rallies, that actually winning and serving again, there's no reason to think that holds any appeal. But what I was trying to get at was that there are things that would be good for the health of democracy generally that would also have the effect of discouraging him from considering another run. So, for instance, if he had to make his tax returns available, if he had to divest of his business ownership, if his foreign partnerships and business deals had to be much more transparently revealed. These are things that it would be in the interest for any party, any candidate going forward. It would be in the interest of democracy for voters to have a much better sense of the financial liabilities and interests of their candidates. in Trump's specific case, we have every reason to believe that he went to great lengths to conceal these financial relationships for a reason. And if he were required to reveal them, that would be quite a considerable deterrent.
Let's talk about a few of them. But before you do, when you were mentioning he appeared to like running more than being president. You remember the great Barney Frank line, when someone won an election, the good news is you won, the bad news is you have to serve. So that is, they're tough jobs. Let's talk about taxes, though. I'd like to think that you're right. The New York Times did brilliant reporting, demonstrated, he didn't even rebut it, that he didn't pay taxes for years. Another year he paid $750. He had $400 million in debt. He didn't deny any of it, and it apparently had no impact on him or his supporters.
Well, so you make a very important point about, at this point, his prediction that he could shoot someone in the middle of Fifth Avenue has looked much less hyperbolic than when he made it. And so it may be that there is nothing that he would be forced to reveal. Although I do think that the fictional character he created of, as the historian Tim Snyder talks about, Donald Trump's successful businessman, was a fictional character. It was a powerful part of his appeal to many people. And you still hear this of people who voted for him, even if they hated the tweeting and they thought that there were real problems in his personal life, but they liked the idea of sending a successful businessman to Washington to clean up what they viewed as being a mess. So it's not entirely clear to me that if we really understood more about some of his financial relationships, that it wouldn't have an impact. Having said that, you mentioned norms. When you brought up the hardening of norms, I do think that is another place where we have discovered that ethics conventions are not going to necessarily be sufficient, that our mechanisms of holding office holders accountable are no longer adequate because he violated so many of them.
But I want to raise one other that you didn't just mention. And one other piece in your Washington Post story is you talk about anti-nepotism rules, obviously being birthed out of the Bobby Kennedy as Attorney General for his brother, the president, and how they had been adhered to by presidents until Donald Trump. I happen to agree with that if he couldn't have Ivanka by his side or his son-in-law by his side. However, you also use the term lackey. And even if his family wasn't there, part of the problem is he had sycophants, lackeys, who, if they stopped being lackeys for a moment, he fired. So is there an anti-lackey provision? There isn't, right? I mean, that would be a tough nut to crack.
There is not. The point I made on the nepotism is that a ruling on Inauguration Day by the Justice Department, on Donald Trump's Inauguration Day, said that it did not extend to the White House staff. So while it precluded another, appointing your brother Attorney General, it did not preclude the roles that Ivanka and Jared were given in the White House. So at a minimum, extending reinterpreting the definition of where that anti-nepotism prohibition, that it should extend to the White House. But you're right. If your goal is loyalty at all costs, and the president was very, very clear about this. He made no secret of what he wanted in an attorney general, what he wanted in his cabinet officers. Those who tried to serve the country as opposed to serving the president himself were punished for it. I mean, ask Alexander Vindman, ask any number of whistleblowers and career prosecutors and people whose entire mission was to enforce the accountability provisions of government, where it was entirely possible because of the nature of executive power for him to punish them. And I think we have to look very hard about how do you strengthen those accountability functions, inspectors general, career prosecutors, whistleblowers.
We only have 30 seconds left, but I have to say, even if your discouragement ideas are not a slam dunk, and I hope they are, as you mentioned a minute ago, they're all good government ideas, and very quickly, and the reason you think some Republicans would break free and support them is because some of those Republicans want to be the president in 2024, correct?
They might do them in the interest of democracy. They might do them in the interest of clearing the field.
Fair enough. Nancy, terrific piece in the Washington Post. Hope people read it. Good to see you again. Thanks so much for your time.
Nice to see you too.